Hi everyone, my name is Pradeep Nayak and I am part of the Vulnerability to Viability Global Partnership for Small Scale Fisheries, which is the organizer of this webinar series. So I'll say a few things about the Global Partnership first before I introduce our speaker for today and also introduce the thematic webinar series. So Vulnerability to Viability Global Partnership is a transdisciplinary research and knowledge network with over 100 members from Asia, Africa, Canada, and internationally. The goal of this partnership is to support small-scale fisheries in their transition from vulnerability to viability. The V2V Global Partnership aims to identify the diverse factors and conditions contributing to the vulnerability of small-scale fisheries and engage collaboratively with small-scale fishing communities around the world and other key NGOs, government, and university partners to enhance small-scale fisheries viability. And the way we look at viability as part of this global partnership is not just in the economic sense, but also looking at all other aspects, including political, cultural, social, and environmental and ecological aspects of viability in the context of small-scale fisheries. In doing so, the V2V Global Partnership brings people and organizations together across physical, cultural, and disciplinary boundaries through a shared interest in addressing global change impacts on small-scale fisheries. We are conducting transdisciplinary community-engaged research in 6 countries in Asia. That includes Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, and Thailand, and 6 countries in Africa. That includes Ghana, Malawi, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and Tanzania. But we are also quite actively engaged in partnerships in other parts of the world. The V2V thematic webinar series, which is today's event, is an initiative of the V2V Global Partnership to facilitate and generate high-level discussions on vulnerability and viability issues and themes within the context of small-scale fisheries. The goal is to feature academics, policy practitioners, and members of the civil society who have made significant contributions to the theoretical, practical, and policy aspects of small-scale fisheries, both locally and globally. The V2B thematic webinar series takes place on the last Friday of every month throughout 2021, and it will go beyond 2021 as well. The series is available internationally through the live streaming on YouTube. Details regarding the monthly webinar, including the speakers, topics, and titles, and links to the webinar platform is available at our website, which is www.v2bglobalpartnership.org. Today's talk is the third in the series in 2021, it is my privilege today to introduce Dr. Ingrid Van Putten as our distinguished speaker. Ingrid is a senior researcher at CISRO in Hobart, Australia, and the Center for Marine Socioecology at the University of Tasmania. As a behavioral economist, Ingrid tries to understand the behavior of marine resource users and find tractable ways to influence behavior and reduce risk in the management of coastal and fisheries and marine systems. Her ultimate aim is to improve the management and long-term viability of coupled marine social ecological systems. A significant focus of Ingrid's research has been on small-scale fisheries and understanding those small-scale fisheries as dynamic social ecological systems. And you will see glimpses of that in the talk today. Ingrid leads numerous research networks of global significance. Particularly, she is the chair of the IMBER Human Dimensions Working Group. She is also a member and co-investigator of the V2B Global Partnership research. It is my honor today to invite Dr. Ingrid Van Putten to deliver a talk for the V2B thematic webinar series. And I thank you, Ingrid, for you making the time. I know it is Saturday morning in Hobart. Ingrid is going to talk about coexistence of legal and illegal supply chains for marine fisheries. Over to you, Ingrid. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pradeep, and thank you very much for that kind introduction. And thank you for inviting me to give this talk. I'm very honoured. And also thank you to CMAR for organising the links and everything. I would also, while I'm on the thank yous, I'd also like to thank my collaborators, Sarah Butilaki and James Butler, who are responsible for a lot of the work that I'm going to be presenting this morning. And I'll be talking about the coexistence of legal and illegal supply chains in marine fisheries and what that means in terms of sustainability, in terms of vulnerability of certain groups, and what can be done about it, if anything can be done about it. So just to reiterate where I am in Hobart. It's 7 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. I think most of my colleagues are still asleep. And you over there in Canada are still on yesterday. I believe it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I was thinking yesterday that if I were to give a talk at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Australia, most of the people would be sitting in the pub, but maybe that same culture is not in Canada. So that's where I'm talking from, but the region I'm going to be talking about is highlighted there, and I put Australia in the middle of the map there, between Australia and Papua New Guinea, and I'll be talking about Papua New Guinea fisheries in particular. But the area in that little blue box is called the Torres Strait. And just zooming in on that area, excuse me, the dark grey area in the middle there is Papua New Guinea. It is on the left-hand side, or on the western side, bordered by Indonesia, the provinces of Papua and West Papua to the west of that. The big island on the southern end is Australia, obviously, and that pointy bit on the eastern side of that is called Cape York. There's a urban capital called Merauke in Indonesia, and I'll be mentioning Merauke quite a bit because that's where a lot of the trade that I'll be talking about happens through. I've put a sort of blue line on that map that goes through the Torres Strait, which shows the maritime boundary of between Australia and Papua New Guinea. Now, if you look at the coloured map, you can see that that boundary is very, very close to Papua New Guinea. And I'm not entirely sure why that boundary is such a weird boundary, but basically it means that from Sabai Island, the one on the eastern side, it's only 5 kilometres to Papua New Guinea. So in fact, the boundaries between Australia and Papua New Guinea are very close. The province that is closest to the Australian island is called the Western Province, and I'll particularly focus in on the South Fly district. On that coloured map, you can also see a place called Daru, which is the urban centre of the South Fly district. Basically, it's about 400 kilometres across the water from Daru to Port Moresby, which is the capital. So there's over 100 islands in the Torres Strait. Only 17 are inhabited. And the largest island on the southern end is called Thursday Island, which is Australian, where Australian Indigenous Torres Strait Islanders live. So the Torres Strait Islander people live in the Torres Strait, and they're Indigenous people to Australia. So the area is important to Australia, as you can imagine, because it's very close to Papua New Guinea and Torres Strait Islander people live there. There is, to enable and acknowledge and protect the traditional way of life of the inhabitants on the northern and the southern end, a Torres Strait Treaty was ratified in 1985. And basically that treaty sets out a framework to guide both countries in providing for the management, the conservation and the sharing of fisheries resources. And it's managed by the Protected Zone Joint Authority. They're responsible for the management of commercial and traditional fishing. So the little map that I'm showing at the bottom of the screen is the Papua New Guinea end of the area that I'm talking about, and there's a string of villages along the coast, and we commonly refer to those as the treaty villages because they're the villages that are allowed to carry on their traditional way of life in Australian waters as well. So that's an important aspect. There's fishing in Papua New Guinea waters, but Papua New Guinea people are allowed to fish in Australian waters if they're from the treaty villages. So there's what we call a catch sharing arrangement with Papua New Guinea. And I have to highlight that commercial fishing is one of the most economically important activities in the Torres Strait on both sides of the strait. Currently, there's formal agreements to cooperatively manage 6 fisheries. We have prawns, tropical rock lobster, which is an important income earner for particularly Torres Strait Islander people in Australia, Spanish mackerel, pearl shell, and turtle and dugong. Turtle and dugong are not commercially caught. They're not allowed to be commercially caught. They're caught for subsistence and traditional purposes. It's the area between Papua New Guinea and Australia and the actual where the treaty villages are is very remote. It's a very difficult area to monitor and to police, as you can imagine. And there's a high potential for illegal fishing, for movement of vessels that are involved in other illicit activities, and for people movement. Now, I mention that because the area in Papua New Guinea is quite poor, and I'll come to that in the next couple of slides, but the PNG people make around 2,500 visits to the medical clinic that's in the Torres Strait on Thursday Island. So they're using the Australian medical system, which is great that they can access that, but it brings with it quite a lot of issues or risks in terms of diseases that no longer exist in Australia that Torres Strait Islander people have been bringing into the Torres Strait. And currently with COVID, there's a lot of Papua New Guinea people in Australian hospitals because of this movement of people through the Torres Strait. Now, one thing I need to mention in the Torres Strait is that it's obvious that Australia has a clear interest in this area because it's very close to Papua New Guinea. There's freedom of movement in that area, and they're sharing fisheries resources. But Australia is currently quite worried because there's part of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, which is a global infrastructure development strategy that's adopted by the Chinese government in 2013 to invest in nearly 70 countries and international organisations. As part of that, they are proposing to build a $200 million Chinese-built fishery plant on Daru Island in the South Fly district, which could allow Chinese-backed commercial vessels to fish legally in the Torres Strait. And this is raising quite a lot of concerns about fishing pressure and unregulated fishing. And it could potentially threaten Australian and PNG fishers in the longer term. That's all I wanted to mention about that in a sense that it sort of sets the scene for the capacity that might be created to fish in this remote area. So just in summary so far, the Torres Strait is very remote. It's a difficult area to police and to monitor what's going on. Australia has a direct interest in the PNG and the South Fly region because it's only 5 kilometres away. And Australia shares the marine resources, the fishing interests in this area. And there's increasing pressure on the marine resources, potentially, and there's also potential for increased PNG capacity by investments. So one more slide around some history of the South Fly district. So not the water area, but the land area. The South Fly sits directly below the South Fly River. So it sits at the mouth of the South Fly River, which is downstream from the Ok Tedi mine. Now, I'm not sure how famous the Octedi mine is overseas, but it's very famous in Australia as an environmental disaster. The Octedi mine was previously owned by an Australian company, BHP, and it disrupted the environmental pollution of around 90 million tonnes of mine waste from a copper and gold mining was dumped into the river, displacing between 1984 and 2013, and it basically disrupted the lives of around 50,000 people. The mine is was nationalised in 2013, but in the interim, there's been a steady movement of people from upstream of the Fly River to the coast because of the pollution, which meant that there's increased competition for marine resources in that area. I should also say that the tribes that live up the river, if you like, are different to the people in the coastal areas, and it has created a significant amount of social conflict because of the different tribes currently living in the same area. So the general demographics of the South Fly district, basically the South Fly coastal population continues to grow. There's an increasing number of people that seek to earn a living from the sea. The returns from fishing are basically not keeping pace with people's needs because the resource is being depleted and there's more people needing to use that resource. So there's serious signs of overfishing in the South Fly district. So I've already alluded to the fact that it's a poor area, and I just wanted to highlight the asymmetries in human development in this region. So just by simply looking at the Human Development Index, it becomes obvious what the asymmetries are. So just for reference, Australia is 8th from the top at 0.994 Human Development Index. Obviously closer to 1 is better. Canada appears 16th. It's still one ahead of the US, you'll be happy to know. The Torres Strait, the Australian part of the Torres Strait, so where Indigenous Torres Strait Islander people live, has the same Human Development Index as Botswana and Jamaica, which is 100th from the top. And that is a blight on Australia's management of Indigenous affairs, I would say. It's a terrible indictment. Papua New Guinea appears 155th from the top, which is not very far from the bottom. I can't remember exactly how many countries they have the HDI for, but I believe it's something like 186 or something like that. So just across that 5 kilometres worth of water, the difference in the Human Development Index is significant, and particularly if we then look at Australia. I think it might be one of the steepest differences between any two countries in the world. Another way of looking at poverty is through the multidimensional poverty index, and the scale on this is the other way around. So closer to 1 is worse and closer to 0 is better. So I've mapped on here the country that always unfortunately appears at the top, which is Niger, which is severely poor. If we look at the bottom green dot there, we can see that Indonesia does quite well. But if we break out the different areas of Indonesia, you can see that the closer you get to Papua New Guinea, excuse me, the worse the multidimensional poverty index gets. PNG is the 23rd poorest country in terms of the multidimensional poverty index, and the treaty villages are doing even worse. So we're talking about a very poor area, and a survey that we did in 2012 and 13 showed that 63% of the people in the PNG treaty villages, so those villages across the bottom there, are multidimensionally poor, and 28% were vulnerable to this poverty. This is particularly the case because also the soils in this region are very impoverished, so people are very dependent on marine resources. And there's very few roads and very few services. So this poverty actually increases with distance. And here again, I'm showing the map, and the further you are away from either the Australian islands or from Daru, which is the urban capital, the worse your multidimensional poverty is. And this relationship was statistically significant. There's a little bit of lower level of poverty in the PNG treaty villages, which lie closest to the Australian treaty villages, the pink islands that I'm showing at the bottom. And this has sort of means that the services that are available on the Australian islands have benefited the people in those PNG villages. I'm also showing that on the left-hand side of that map is Indonesia and Merauke. So I've already highlighted that the role of fishing is very important in the treaty villages in the South Fly region. Fish is a staple food source for all the villages, and it also provides income to buy other food. The majority of household cash, though, so there's sort of informal trading as well, but the majority of household cash is currently obtained from beche the mare, shark fin, and fish maw. And I don't know if maw is an Australian expression or not, but it's basically the swim bladders of the fish. And in this case, it's barramundi and jewfish. And I failed to put on there that mud crab are also a source of income. And I'll be talking about these 4 products in the rest of my talk. But I also want to highlight that sharks and rays are Papua New Guinea's 5th most important export fishery, which I didn't know about before I put this talk together. So the current status of fishing in the South Fly region, current catch trends are unsustainable. The collapse of reef fish and other stocks will, if they collapse fully, it'll have major effects on food security, livelihoods and poverty. And this food security is already evident in the pressure in Australian waters will also increase as local resources are depleted, and poaching is also likely to increase with these current catch trends. So again, a little summary so far. It's a very remote area. It's a very poor area. Fishing is very important for households and food, and marine resources are rapidly being depleted. It's not a very optimistic picture that I'm painting. So the products that I mentioned already that are traded have both legal and illegal value chains, and they run in parallel. And that's what I'll be talking about next, now that I've set the context for the area. So to get information on the legal and illegal supply chains for these different fisheries, we did extensive fieldwork and surveys to basically understand the supply chains and trade routes. So we did individual interviews and key informant interviews, both in Papua New Guinea and in Indonesia to understand the Indonesian component of those supply chains. And we also held focus groups in the South Fly. We held a workshop at the end to at the end of this project, although there's ongoing work, to come up with potential solutions, which basically is what we're doing, what we're hoping to do in the next little while, is to actually implement some of the solutions we might that might be tractable. So I'm going to talk briefly about each of those products because it's important to understand the types of products that are traded. So firstly, there is the barramundi and jewfish that are caught. They're the big fish you can see in that picture, they're jewfish there. The actual fish is not the product. It's actually only the swim bladder that is used in this trade. The meat is often wasted because there is no refrigeration. So trading it with Australia, or it's a very, very good eating fish, but trading it with Australia, where high prices are paid for barramundi, is not something that is done. The fish swim bladders are harvested and then they're dried. So this fishery has some legal size and spatial and temporal measures, but they're generally disregarded by the fishers. This fishery, both those fisheries are very vulnerable to overexploitation because of the life cycle traits of those fish. So this is the first product. The second product is bêche de mer, and most people, or sea cucumber, most people would be familiar with that. It's a product that's harvested throughout Asia and other countries. It is also a dried product, and for obvious reasons, because there is no other way that the product can be kept for export. There's a fishing moratorium on bêche de mer because it was severely overfished. However, that's not stopping people fishing, and bêche de mer is traded all year round. The quality of the bêche de mer is important, and it affects the price. And increasingly, the provenance of the product is becoming more important, so which opens up incentives, I guess, for mislabeling where it comes from. The last, the third product is shark, and not the shark itself, but shark fin. There's no formal fisheries regulations that manage shark in this area, or shark fin trade, but there's many endangered species that are being caught as part of this, which is illegal. The CSIRO, where I'm based, has done quite a lot of work in trying to figure out which species are actually being harvested. The shark fin trade has been a little bit of a global demand decrease due to, and there's some stricter regulations in some countries, and also due to the anti-finning campaigns, which has affected demand. Again, I just want to highlight that shark fin, in my mind, is a very wasteful fishery. The flesh is, or it's basically just the fins that are used, which is quite tragic in my mind. The fourth fishery is mud crab, and I need to highlight that this is caught by the female fishers. The previous three products, the fish bladders, the bêche de mer, and the shark fin, are male-dominated fisheries, whereas mud crabs are female fisheries. Again, it's suffering from overexploitation. Mud crab has seen a big increase in harvesting, but it provides direct income for the women, cash income for the women. And the quality of the mud crab, the price really depends on the size and the shell consistency. Crabs are sold both on the markets locally as well as exported, and I'll show you the supply chains for all of those products in a second. But essentially, all these products end up in the Chinese market. For more shark fin and bêche de mer, they all end up there, or there's some that go into Asian markets around China. And mud crab is exported live to those markets. There's also products that are not formally traded, and I mentioned before that Australia and Papua New Guinea have a catch sharing agreement that also applies to dugong and turtle, but some of the dugongs are caught as bycatch in shark nets, and their tusks are traded with Indonesia and then also ending up in the Chinese market. I don't know the actual, what they do with the tusks. I'm assuming it's an aphrodisiac of some sort. I'm not sure. The dugong was important as a food source, and then they have a high market value, but you're not allowed to trade them anymore. But there are still some traded in the Daru market. But turtles and dugong are not as common around Daru anymore as they were in the 1990s. So how does this trade flow actually happen within this remote area? So if the first and most important trade route that I'm showing here in that sort of lilac purple sort of colour is from all the little villages via a local middleman to Merauke in Indonesia and onwards from there. So the middlemen will sail their little dinghies along the coast and drop into all the villages and pick up any of the products and take it to Merauke. Now, I should mention that the ethnic groups are permitted to engage in traditional and customary trade across that border, and that the value of that trade has a maximum of like $300 US. But fisheries products are not formally considered traditional trade, and they're not exempted. So the trade that happens is in fact illegal. The second route for the fish products is via the Australian islands. So product is taken to Boigu and Sabah, and from there enters the Australian system. We weren't able to investigate what happens with the product, but you can imagine that it ends up in the Australian product supply chains. Those two routes are illegal and or sometimes talked about as informal. The legal route for the product to go is via Daru and then on to Port Moresby and export market. So just drawing out those supply chains and with some prices that are paid for them. So the fish maw, shark fin and beche de mer is mainly caught by male fishers, as I said before, and this is important in what I'll show you later on. All those fisheries have illegal or unsustainable components to them. They're catching vulnerable and endangered species, fishing in closed seasons during moratorium, and using wrong mesh sizes, etc. So there's illegal and unsustainable fishing practices for all three fisheries. The legal route for the product to go is quite simple. It goes via local middlemen or straight to licensed buyers and exporters in Daru, onto Port Moresby and onto the markets in Asia and Hong Kong being the key to entering the Chinese market. If it doesn't go via the legal chain, it'll go via unlicensed cross-border middlemen, as I showed you, that come and pick the product up from all the villages. There's a stack of informal taxation and bribes that happen along the way there. It then goes to the Merauke in Indonesia, where again, taxation and bribes, but also other informal illegal activities take place, such as that it's traded as Indonesian product, absence of health certificates, etc., etc. It then goes to the larger operators and to the exporters in Surabaya and Jakarta, and onwards to the Asian market. So these are the logistics for the legal and the illegal supply chain. Now, interestingly, I'm just flicking up the prices that are obtained for those products. For jewfish, the price obtained in the illegal market is slightly lower than what you can get in the legal market. For shark fin and beche de mer, that difference between the prices in the legal and the illegal market is much starker. Particularly for beche de mer, there's the price in the illegal component of the supply chain is much lower than in the legal component of the supply chain, and the same for shark fin. So aside from the price difference between the two chains, the markup from what the fishers get to what the exporters get is quite stark again. they're not capturing a lot of value from the product. The markup for shark fin is huge. It's 91 times what the fishery is being paid. So, and the product, as most of you would probably know, is quite expensive if you buy it in the Chinese market. So where does this money go? Well, I feel a bit awkward putting this slide in, but it was the only picture I could find. As I said, these three products, because of the illegality of these products, a lot of, well, not maybe because of, but one of the coincidences is that it's mainly caught by men, and often it's caught by young men that are involved in this trade. And as a consequence of that, some of the money, the cash that's obtained for these illegal products, if they enter the illegal supply chain, some of it ends up in the household, but some of it also does not end up in the household. And there is a lot of anecdotal evidence to suggest that the purposes for which it is used are not necessarily conducive to livelihood or to well-being, with some consequences for domestic violence as well, as an anecdotal thing that happens. So the money, I think that's important as a background as well. So we still have the mud crab supply chain to show you. Again, there's illegal and unsustainable fishing going on. It's mainly a fishery that women do. Their legal supply chain is they sell it at the local dairy market, but also via the exporters to China. They also sell it at the Merauke market and in the Australian Sabai and Boigu markets. There are illegal ways also via middlemen in Indonesia to China. So the prices that are obtained, again, there's a stark difference between the legal price and the illegal prices. 9 kina for the illegal and 53 for the legal. The markup is, again, quite large, 20 times the prices that are paid to the fishers. So those were the supply chains for the 4 products, 3 of which caught by men, largely illegal at any stage of the supply chain. The lower average prices in the illegal part of the supply chain, and only a small share of the total product values received by the PNG fishers. In our survey work, we found that the majority of fishers indicated they would not engage in the illegal chain if there was a legal alternative that paid the same, which illustrates that there was a misconception around prices, which I'll get to again in a minute. So the reason for involvement in the legal supply chain, there's basically systemic issues embedded in the social and economic and cultural characteristics of the South Fly communities, which disincentivize people from engaging in the legal value chains, even when they are more profitable. So lower prices that are paid contradicts findings of a lot of other studies where, for instance, regulation and enforcement has reduced supply, and an unintended consequence of enforcement can be that the price of the product goes up because there's a reduced supply, which then further incentivizes illegal wildlife harvesting. And that's one of the really difficult issues economically that you have to deal with if you are trying to stop illegal trade. So just before I illustrate some of those social and economic and cultural issues that encourage people to participate in that illegal supply chain, I've just, as a background, there's, again, just to remind you, there's a rapid transition to a cash economy which means there's a continuous need for cash, and those 3 or 4 products provide that cash for these communities in this poor area. The authorities in Papua New Guinea are very tolerant of illegal trade, and there's a lack of government enforcement capacity. There are some cases where the authorities have caught people doing illegal trade in marine products, but anecdotally, a lot of those have been catching people from the tribes that were from up the Fly River in doing this activity. So there's some tribal things going on there as well. The legal chains, one of the important things that we found is, which is an obvious one, but it's the legal value chains are often inaccessible. So the distance to market was a more robust indicator of illegality than poverty in the region. So we found that there was a lot of information needs and capacity. So the fishers often lacked information about alternative or legal trade routes, and they had misconceptions and lack of information around prices and markups. When we had our workshop to tell them about some of our results or to discuss some of our results, they were very surprised at what the markup, for instance, for the shark fin was. There's also a lack of knowledge about how to handle the product. So even though it's dried product, which is the only product that they're able to trade because others, fresh product would go off, there was a lack of knowledge on how to best dry it so that it fetches high prices. So they received lower prices because of the poor product quality, which a lot of the time only the Indonesian middlemen accept that product. And then there's a whole stack of obligatory dependencies that illustrate the dependencies on the illegal supply chains. Provisions by services of middlemen. This is not unique in Indonesia, but there's a convenience of coming to the door. Indonesian middlemen are often the only source of information for the communities, and they have no further communication infrastructure. And the Indonesian middlemen can basically dictate the prices and apply leverage by withholding things like fuel, fishing nets and other gear that are part of the deal when they supply the product to them. The PNG fishers have absolutely no bargaining power in this. There's also increasing family and kinship ties between the Indonesian and the Papua New Guinea side through intermarriages, etc., which again creates obligatory dependencies in this trade. So a short summary again. Illegal elements in the supply chain for shark fin, fish maw, beche the mare and mud crab, and that illegality starts at the fishing end and works its way all the way up the chain through bribes, false labelling, harvesting protected species, etc. There's a general knowledge of this illegality, both fishers and authorities. The fishers in interviews readily acknowledge that they're participating in trade through Indonesia, and the authorities are tolerant of this illegal trade, aside from the occasional raid that happens. But there's a huge lack of knowledge on many other aspects, such as product quality, prices and markups, as I've already said. There are some socio-demographic drivers for the villagers to remain reliant on illegal chains, but the legal chains are more profitable. However, they're inaccessible for many people. So how do you solve this dilemma? And I would like to highlight that the two of the particular fisheries are very wasteful. So the bladder, the maw trade, and also the shark fin trade, they're incredibly wasteful fisheries in terms of flesh of the fish. But how do we solve this problem on environmentally sustainable fisheries, even though there's increasing pressure on the resource through demographic reasons, and there's a potential for increased capacity if China builds a plant, a fishery plant there? And how do you increase legal livelihood options in this remote area with the socioeconomic drivers for illegal activities? And how do you increase the returns to fishers? And what are the dangers of increasing these return for fishers for these fisheries that, for particularly two, that are very wasteful? So we try to come up with some solutions, and I won't actually focus on those solutions very much. I'll show you a slide in a minute, but we did workshops where we went through what the issues were, what the symptoms of those issues were, and the root causes for those symptoms, and then try to come up with solutions. So we came up with a series of solutions to ensuring environmental sustainability and increasing legal livelihood options. And as you can see, if you work from the inside to the outside, you can find the issue, the symptom, the root cause, and the solution. Said I won't dwell on any of these, except for one of the things that was brought up at this meeting as a way of increasing livelihoods, and it was particularly through the fisheries of the women, because the women, the cash that the women earn goes directly to the household, and their fishery is also threatened. But one of the things that they indicated they wanted was to have better business models for their fishery to, I guess, grab more of that value that's added to that. So this is one of the projects that has arisen from the previous one, where we first of all figured out the illegal and the legal supply chains to figure out how the product currently goes, what can be done about that, and the different aspects that are creating unsustainable fisheries and illegal livelihoods. So for this women's project, we're going to hopefully collaborate with the women there to design appropriate business and resource management models that will basically maximise their income returns and encourage sustainable fisheries for mud crab, but also in this case tilapia, which is another fish that women sell at the market. So this is my last summary slide. I hope I've made it clear to you that it's a really tricky situation when legal and illegal supply chains for products that are, some of which are wasteful, exist. In Papua New Guinea, this is a really tricky situation because of the poverty and the remoteness. The marine resource depletion is real. The pressure is increasing, the actual pressure now, but also the latent potential for pressure increases. Socio-demographic and geographic drivers of illegal trade, which is a complex socio-ecological system, if you like. Fishers aren't capturing the value in this very poor area of the world. And some of the products, as I said, seem wasteful, particularly fish maw and fins. But solutions are possible, even though it might not be easy. And co-designing some of these solutions in previous workshops has thrown up some and has been driven by the people in Papua New Guinea, which has, for one, resulted in this project with the women in the treaty villages. And there are other possibilities, solutions such as governance, information and awareness, but at the moment we're focusing on these women. And that was my last slide, and thank you very much. And I'd also like to again acknowledge the two people who are my two CSIRO colleagues who are key to this, this work and have been working in Papua New Guinea for many, many years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. So in the remaining time, we have questions from the YouTube audience. That Simur, you're able to bring them to the.
Sure.
Shall I stop sharing my screen? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, that's fine. Yes, yeah, you can.
Okay. We just have a couple of comments. First, Jessica is saying your talk is the perfect way for us to end the week. Evan says if the pubs were open, I would be watching from there. And then we have a question from Anna. She says, hi, Ingrid, this is also interesting. You mentioned that a key issue on illegal fishing is the lack of information on how to move towards legal options. I wonder if the project contributed to bring information to the community, and if so, do you think this will have long-term implications in the fishing communities? Thank you.
Yeah, very good question. We did do a lot of interaction with the communities in providing them with what we found. And so it was very obvious at those meetings that they were hearing new information and they were very, very interested in it, particularly around prices. That there is no, because it's such remote areas and the communities are quite remote from each other as well, there's very little information sharing on prices. So we found that they were particularly surprised by that. I think that they feel, well, that I'd like to think that they felt more empowered to actually get more of the money in the value chain to them because of this knowledge. And sometimes it's surprising how little or how much they actually know in the villages. So there's a lot that they know that obviously we haven't tapped into, but some of the simple things that we thought they might know, they didn't. And I believe that this project definitely helped give them information that they previously didn't have, which hopefully will create some empowerment to them.
Ingrid, I have a question from Derek Armitage. Derek is asking, the wheel of issues and solutions is really interesting. What is the role of governance and especially co-management as a strategy to address these issues?
Yeah, I think co-management is a really important one, particularly because there are also a lot of kinship ties through the Australian part of the Torres Strait. The governance, that part of Papua New Guinea is largely ignored by the government. So there's a bit of a vacuum, if you like. So anything more than a vacuum would be great in terms of governance, but its remoteness makes it very difficult, and it's not an easy problem to solve. But I definitely think that co-management is a solution, and whether that's co-management through inclusion of other countries or not, but it won't be simple because of the tribal issues that arise there as well. So I'm not really giving Derek a very good answer here. I think to go forwards and to solve these problems, the current situation there needs to be something that changes. Intuitively, you would say co-management is the way forward, but the local cultural characteristics might prevent that initially from happening. And what needs to happen then in terms of cultural adjustments or changing of norms and values is perhaps not such a simple, quick process.
Do you have the data for the volume of illegal and legal trades? So it seems like the illegal trade volume is much more than the legal, or no? Are they comparable?
Yeah, there's the illegal route. Well, obviously there's a high uncertainty around volumes there because of the information that is gathered, but it is a significant part. Yeah, it's not just like 10%. It's much more than that. Yeah.
Okay. We have a question from Madhu Galalapati. Does this also suggest that the laws and regulations that save legal versus illegal needs to be revisited by perhaps bringing the socio-economic considerations to the center.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's key to this issue, is that the context matters and the context has to be taken into account. I personally sort of feel that there's a lot of responsibility that should lie with Australia, for instance, in changing the socioeconomic realities over there, and not necessarily in investing in more capacity in terms of fishing capacity, but necessarily investing in other social means that can improve the livelihoods of the people there and the services they have access to as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Ingrid, can you reflect on, what really drives the illegal value chain or supply chain, as you mentioned, and because on the other side, you mentioned that this is not profitable. It pays them less than the legal value chain. So what is the motivation for people to engage in illegal value chain? Is it quick money? Is it,
It's
influenced
ease
from?
Yeah, it's ease of money. A lot of the time people would say, oh, look, they come to the door. So because they come with their dinghies and visit the villages. So there's a certain ease in someone dropping by. There's no reason why that couldn't be the case for the legal supply chain, where people would come and pick up the fish from the villages as well. There is just reiterating the lack of information around other options. The middlemen obviously tie their sellers to them by providing them with fuel and money and other things that, again, that's a common theme in Asian fisheries, I guess, that there's other goods that they get from the middlemen, which ties them to them. And there's the kinship relationships, and the fact that it's just so easy, right? There's no reason not to, because that it's illegal is neither here nor there. It's basically the tolerance of illegality matters, and I guess that's a social norm sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. We have a question from Anna. The question is, I wonder if the project contributed to bring information to the community, and if so, do you think this will have long-term implications in the fishing communities?
We
information to the community. Did you read that already? Or?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. I do have a follow-up question on the topic that we're discussing, though. So how feasible is the use of technology and telecommunications and things like WhatsApp to respond to the lack of knowledge and power imbalance?
So yeah, communication, that's one, again, it's a thing that you would think would be an obvious one. Communication in that area is very challenging in terms of both people movement, but also in terms of Wi-Fi being available, for instance. And I mean, again, throughout parts of Asia, it's challenging. So I believe that if that was available and people started sharing prices through WhatsApp, that would help. And perhaps that is one of the things that could happen in the future. I think anything that makes more information available is a good thing. However, it can also have unintended consequences in a sense that it could also increase the illegal trade, and it could also increase illegal harvesting at the fisher end. So there are, there is always potential for unintended consequences of providing technological solutions. I should also mention that I hope it was clear in my talk, there's no things like refrigeration in those areas. So any sort of perishable product can't be kept. There have been attempts at building refrigerated facilities, but usually they deteriorate very quickly, not only because of the local sort of climate, but also because of a lack of people who can maintain these infrastructure. So having a refrigeration mechanic is not available, and that's the end of the refrigeration facility.
Maybe one last question, if you wish. So the question is, I'm intrigued by the way you are communicating the complexity of the issues with that issues and solutions wheel. Can you talk about how you pull that together? So how did you come to the creating the wheel?
So the solutions wheel was created by the local people. So the workshop, a workshop was held after we found out what the situation was in terms of trade and etc. And we identified those issues through our research and put those on the table and had discussions around what the issues really were for the local people. And then in a systematic way, worked outwards via the symptoms and the root causes to the solution. So it was entirely, it's just an entirely sort of co-produced way of getting to solutions with local communities. And it's a very simple way of doing it because you only have to think about 4 things and they do follow. So yeah, as I said, it was done at workshops with local communities, and it's a very powerful way because then people will say things like, look, we really need to work with the women to do X, Y, Z, and they come up with their own solutions, and that's how these new projects arise from previous projects. And so, and I guess there is an element of being pure research in some of these things, and you think, well, what's the value to the local community? But through working to these solutions, the local community can actually own some practical follow-up projects that will give them a better future, I guess. That's the hope, that it has some practical aspects to it.
Yeah, and it also looks very effective for interacting with policymakers and decision makers. So
yeah,
okay,
yeah, sure.
I think we are at time now, and I would like to say a big thank you to you, Ingrid, again for that fascinating talk and engaging with many questions. So thank you very much. Before we go, we would like to announce our next talk, and I may request Simmer to bring up the poster for next talk. The next talk is going to be by Dr. Sylvia Salas from Cineveste in Merida, Mexico. And the topic of her talk is going to be vulnerability and viability of small-scale fisheries, drivers and prospects, especially focusing on the Latin American small-scale fisheries. So please tune in the last Friday of April, which is the 30th of April. And the details are on the poster here, but you can also find it on the B2B Global Partnership website. Thank you very much to everyone who joined through Zoom and also the YouTube channel. And once again, thank you very much to our speaker today, Dr. Ingrid Van Putten. Thank you.
Thank you.